You know, when we think about fighting crime, our minds usually jump to one image: flashing lights, sirens, police cars racing to a scene. But what if I told you that the most effective ways to prevent crime look nothing like that at all? In this explainer, we're going to dig into a totally different approach, one that's all about solving problems before the sirens are ever needed.
We've all seen this, right? It's the standard picture of policing we get from movies, from the news. But the big question we're asking today is reacting to emergencies the best we can do, or is there a smarter, more proactive way to actually make our communities safer?
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start by rethinking what actually works in policing. Then we'll get into a really cool problem-solving method called SARA. We'll break down what a crime really is, talk about the surprising role of opportunity, and finally, we'll tackle that huge myth about crime just moving around the corner.
All right, let's dive right in with the big picture: modern policing itself. Are the strategies we just assume are working actually getting the job done?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? For decades, criminologists have been digging into the data, trying to figure out what impact police strategies actually have. And, well, the results might not be what you expect.
Okay, so take a look at this. This is where it gets really eye-opening. The standard model, random patrols, racing to 911 calls, basic investigations, the stuff we see on TV all the time. There's little to no evidence it actually reduces crime, but look at the bottom of the chart. Things like focused policing and especially problem-oriented policing, they show moderate to strong evidence of working. The takeaway here is huge. It's not about more policing, it's about smarter policing.
And that brings us directly to one of those smarter strategies. It's a structured, almost scientific method for getting ahead of crime, and it's called problem-oriented policing.
At its heart, problem-oriented policing, or POP, is a complete shift in mindset. Instead of just running from one emergency to the next, it stops and asks the most important question. Hey, why does this keep happening in the first place? It's about diagnosing the disease, not just treating the symptoms over and over again.
And it follows this really simple four-step loop called SARA. First, you scan the data to find patterns. Maybe there's a bunch of car break-ins happening in one specific parking lot. Then you analyze. Why is it happening there? Is it poor lighting? No security? Then you create a custom response to fix those underlying issues. And finally, and this is key, you assess. Did it work? It's a constant cycle of learning and getting better.
Okay, so how do you actually do that analysis step? To really solve a problem, you need a way to understand it, right? In criminology, there's a fantastic tool for this, and it's called the crime triangle. It seems so obvious when you say it out loud, but honestly, it gets missed all the time. A crime isn't just some random bolt of lightning. It's an event with specific ingredients that have to come together at just the right time and place. And here are those three essential ingredients. For a crime, like, say, a street robbery to happen, you absolutely need three things: a motivated offender, a suitable target, and a place where they can meet. Now, here's the insight that changes everything. To stop the crime, you don't have to fix the world. You just have to remove one side of that triangle.
But it gets even deeper. Each one of those elements has someone or something that's supposed to be controlling it. The offender has a handler. Think a parent, a coach, a parole officer. The target has a guardian. That could be you, a good lock on your door or a security camera. And the place has a manager, like a building supervisor or a bar owner. So crime isn't just about a bad guy making a bad choice. It's often a failure of this whole system. It happens when these controllers, the handlers, guardians, and managers, are either absent or just not doing their job.
And when you start thinking about the crime triangle and these controllers, it leads you to this really powerful, maybe even controversial idea. What if the single biggest cause of crime isn't deep-seated motivation, but simple opportunity?
We've all heard this old saying, right? But for a whole field of criminologists, this isn't just a catchy phrase, it's a fundamental principle. They argue that opportunity doesn't just decide when or where a crime happens, it can decide if it happens at all. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Come on, if someone is really determined to do something, they'll just find another way. It's a fair point. So to really test this idea, let's look at a powerful, real-world case study, one involving suicide, an act that we often think of as being incredibly motivated and pretty much unstoppable. So back in the 1950s, the gas used for cooking and heating in the UK was super toxic. And because it was so available and so lethal, it was used in almost half of all suicides. Then, the whole country switched over to non-toxic natural gas. And just as you'd expect, suicides by gassing basically vanished. But here's the jaw-dropping part. Look at the total number of suicides. It didn't stay the same. It fell by almost 30%. By removing one easy, available opportunity, thousands of people didn't just switch methods. The tragic impulse passed, and lives were saved. It was a massive net prevention effect.
And we see this same pattern with other really serious crimes. A famous study compared Seattle and Vancouver, two pretty similar cities, right? But they had very different handgun laws. The result? The risk of being murdered with a handgun was 5 times higher in Seattle, where the opportunity, the access, was just way greater.
Okay, so if we accept that reducing opportunity can actually prevent crime, that immediately leads to the next big question. You know the one, it's what everybody asks next.
Yep, there it is. The idea of displacement. The belief that if you put a lock on your door, the burglar just goes next door. It feels like common sense, right? But what does the actual evidence say?
Well, the fear is displacement, but the finding is that it's just massively overblown. A huge review that looked at 55 different studies found that a lot of the time, no displacement happened at all. And even when it did happen, it was never a perfect one-for-one swap. You always end up with a net reduction in crime. And you can see these real-world wins everywhere. When Sweden required new IDs for cashing checks, check fraud just plummeted. It didn't all turn into credit card fraud. When Australian banks beefed up security, robbers didn't all just start hitting convenience stores. When one apartment complex in Virginia solved its burglary problem, the burglars didn't just flood the complex next door. The evidence is just overwhelming.
But here's where it gets even cooler. Not only is displacement not a big deal, but sometimes the exact opposite happens. It's a phenomenon called diffusion of benefits. This is basically a positive ripple effect. You lock down crime in one spot, and crime in the surrounding areas also goes down, because would-be offenders get paranoid and think the risk is higher everywhere.
So let's just put it side by side. With displacement, the negative ripple, you secure one building and the burglars just move to the next. But with diffusion of benefits, the positive ripple, you secure that same building and burglaries go down in the entire neighborhood. It's an incredible force multiplier for good.
So, what does this all mean? We've seen that focusing on the root causes and shrinking opportunities is way more effective than just reacting. We've seen that it doesn't just push crime around the block. In fact, it can create this amazing halo of prevention. Which leaves us all with a pretty big question to think about. What problems in our own communities could we start to solve, not by reacting faster, but just by thinking a little bit smarter about opportunity?